Okay, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's good to see all of you. My name is Nathan Solis. I'm a reporter with the Los Angeles Times, and I'm also the vice president with SPJ Los Angeles chapter. Tonight we have a pretty interesting panel discussion. Originally, this was put together by Brittany Mejia, but she cannot be here tonight because she is reporting in the field. But she was gracious to send over her introduction to me. So I'm going to read that now, but just imagine that this is Brittany saying all of this. So she said, many of us have wrestled or are still wrestling with how to advocate for ourselves. I was never taught in journalism school how to ask for a raise or how to get put up for more opportunities. I had to learn on the fly and often came to rely on white men in the newsroom who knew the process much better than I did and who urged me to push for more than I thought I deserved. The whole goal of this panel is to give you the confidence to ask for what you deserve and to show off some of the badasses doing this every day. So with that being said, I want to throw it over to Erick Galindo. I feel like we would be here all night if I try to go through all the many accomplishments that Erick has done recently. You may know him as the host of Wild over at LAist Studios and many other amazing projects. So that's it for me. You won't see my face until the end of all this. So Erick, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I couldn't think of a better panel to answer this question about advocating for yourself, because these three people are so boss. They've been killing it for so long. They've negotiated with like giant corporations and advocated for people on their teams and for themselves. So this is the perfect squad. I'm going to start off with the homie Carolina Miranda at the LA Times. I've been to her house. I've had mezcal with her. She's an incredible, incredible writer. She's currently a columnist covering art, architecture, and urban design, along with the various other facets of LA culture for the Los Angeles Times. Hi, Carolina.
Hi, thank you for having me.
For sure. Next, we have Tre'vell Anderson. Tre'vell is an award-winning journalist, a social curator, and a world changer who was named to the Roots 2020 list of the 100 most influential African Americans in existence, I believe, right? Like that's of all time. So thank you, Tre'vell, for being here. She's currently editor-at-large for Toronto's Xtra magazine, and she co-hosts two podcasts, Crooked Media's What a Day and Maximum Funds FANTI. Am I saying FANTI right?
You're not. You're saying it's FANTI. But thanks for having me. Hi, y'all.
Thank you, Tre'vell. I knew I wasn't cool enough to say that word. I fucking knew it. Okay. And then last but certainly not least, we have the boss of APM Studios, Joanne Griffith. She's the chief content officer for American Public Media Studios, as I just said. She was previously at ESPN. She did The King of Crenshaw, 30 for 30 on Nipsey. Beautiful, beautiful work. And she is the founder of Entitled for Leaders of Color in Media. Thank you, Joanne, for being here. Excellent, excellent. So we're just gonna get this started. You know, I think that advocating for yourself in this business is hard because when you come in with these ideals, right? You're like, I'm doing this for my community. I'm doing this for the culture. I'm doing this like because it's a service, right? It's a calling, they say. The storytelling that we do. But I know all three of you have had to ask for money, so I'm going to start with you, Joanne, because you're running a studio, and that's pretty big. And I want to know what's it like for you to be in that position where you're taking pitches, requesting budgets, asking for money for the team, saying yes to people, saying no to people who are asking you for money. Like, can you just tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, I'm really thankful that I don't do it alone. I have people who look after finance, other folks are looking at kind of ad sales and brand solutions. We have, a head of production who's looking at our scheduling and kind of making sure that we don't have a lot of things at one go and then like nothing for a while. So it's definitely very much a team effort over at studios. But, it's a lot to working as a creative, you mentioned there that I worked at ESPN, I was at KPCC, I worked at the BBC for many years. And like when you're a creative, like your ideas are your currency, right? They're the things that are actually going to make you money. They are the things that kind of give you meaning and purpose in life. And so for me, when people are sending me their ideas, it's not just something that they just wrote on a piece of paper and then just decided to send in. It's a little bit of their heart, their mind, their soul. And as a commissioner, I am very respectful of that. But the other side of this too, especially working in podcasting, like we have to make money. It is a business. And so it's always really looking at what is the deal that you can structure that is going to be beneficial to the creator, that's going to keep their idea intact, that it's going to be something they're going to be very proud of at the end of it, but also thinking about ways of like, how do we monetize this product in a way that is fair and respectful, not just to the creator, but also to the audience, because obviously all of us do this work because of the audience. So it is this really kind of fine line between, looking at what I have, like, kind of in my big couch of coins and what I can spend on shows, but also kind of thinking about what's the experience of the creators and what is it that we're going to serve our audience with. I will say something that you mentioned there at the beginning though, Eric, that so many of us as creators kind of think about this work as service. Listen, if you hear nothing else tonight, I'm looking at the camera, even in service, you must get paid. Service does not pay your bills. It doesn't give you health care. It doesn't put gas in your car. It doesn't give you anywhere to live. Service, it does not equal working for free. So I want to make sure that we start there and that everyone gets that in their head, because it's really important. Get your money.
I appreciate that. I'm very tempted to like elevator pitch you a bunch of podcasts right now, but I won't. Because that was so
you got my number. It's so good.
It was so inspirational, and I was like, "Yo, I should get Joanna." Tre'vell, you created a whole ass beat. Like the beat didn't exist, and you created the beat covering Black and queer film. Like I'm like, how the fuck do you even do that? How do you like advocate to the higher ups to create something that no one else has done? And how do you put a value on that?
You just do it, and then you start saying you did it, and then they're looking at the work, and it's like, well, I guess you did do it, which, so yeah, that whole situation, it wasn't really like a mandate. Like I knew that there were certain types of stories that I wanted to cover because there were certain types of films and shows and whatnot that I wanted to watch. And many of those types of shows and movies just weren't being covered by the other folks on the team. And so I started covering it, right? And then because I had been covering it for a minute, I always say that Oscar So White gave me job security, because I was in the Minority Editorial Training Program, METPRO Fellowship at the LA Times. I was like a year and a half into it, had been covering diversity in Hollywood before it became the buzzword it is now, right? And then when Oscar So White happened and all these publications started talking about the lack of diversity in Hollywood, I'd like to think that we were able to look at our coverage at the LA Times, and particularly my coverage, and say, oh, we've already been doing this. And so in my head, I said that they said we should keep this person around to continue covering this type of stuff. And then so there came a point where I began having a lot more control over what I covered and what I didn't, based on that. And so I say all that to say, for me, a lot of the success that I've kind of had in advocating for myself has just been, unfortunately, a manifestation of that thing that I think a lot of folks get told, which is, particularly when you're young or when you're new to a particular environment, which is to like say yes to everything, to go above and beyond the call of duty, which is, i.e. do work that you ain't being necessarily paid to do, right? And I did that. And then it worked out for me in a way to where I was able to then only do that stuff that I wanted to do and not necessarily do all the other stuff that I might have been expected to do. But for so many of us, it doesn't go to that next level, right? And then you end up working 20 years doing the stuff you really want to do that you're passionate about and all of this other shit that don't nobody really care about, but everybody think you have to do, right? And so, yeah, I'm rambling at this point. But the last thing I will say is that I think that, you know, to Joanne's point, right? I think conversations about money, conversations about standing up for oneself and advocating for oneself are always like tough because we don't talk about money, particularly in communities of color, right? And so it always just feels like icky or unsure when you get into the negotiation process. And then 5 years down the road, you figure out that, oh, you could have got $20,000 more on that salary if you had just asked, right? And so many of us ain't asking. I'll shut up. Go.
No. I think that's great. Just a quick follow up is like, you created this whole beat and you created this value, right? And then how did you know when it was time to like cash in, like for lack of a better word, to be like, all right, y'all want me, this is content that you need.
Interestingly enough, like I said, I was in that fellowship program. And for those who don't know, that fellowship program was at the time an up to 2-year program. And you weren't guaranteed a job at the end of that 2-year program. After Oscar So White happened, and I began to see what I thought was a value in what I was providing to the paper, I went to our editor-in-chief at the time, Davon. I went into his office and I said, you need to hire me now because I'm doing great work. No one else on my floor is doing what I'm doing. Yes, I know I'm a fellow right now, but I feel like I should not have to wait until that 2-year period in order to get hired. 2 weeks later, not only was I getting hired, the entire Metro class was getting hired, right? And now I don't know if there was other strings being pulled behind the curtain, right? But what I do know is that I felt compelled to go into his office, right? And I felt empowered because of the work that I had been doing to go into his office and say that like, I don't think I should have to wait another 6 months to get hired full time and i.e. get paid more money for the type of work that I'm doing. And so I think that sometimes you just gotta go to the boss and say, hey, something's wrong, ain't it? Like I'm doing a lot of work here, ain't I?
Right, for sure. And speaking of the boss, I know our other panelist, Carolina Miranda, has had to deal with all of the LA Times bosses. And I've always wanted to know what it's like to bargain for everybody's salary. Like, and also like, does that impact the way you are seen by the bosses after? Like, you were that person, you know?
I was that person. I mean, to take a step back a little quickly, just to piggyback onto what Tre'vell was saying, I think, you know, what happens so often when we get to the salary and benefits portion as reporters is we have these incredible instincts as reporters, which is to dig, to find out, to see what's fair. And we do that all the time for everything except our own compensation. You know, people walk in blind to meetings about what standard pay for a particular position might be. I think if, you know, one of the things to know is that, for example, in the state of California, an employer is not allowed to legally ask you what you earned at your previous job. That's an attempt to not maintain inequities in pay. You get paid what the job pays. You don't get paid based off your last job. I think the other important thing to know is that even if a company maybe it's a private company, they're not willing to tell you what a salary is, you're really going to have to negotiate. That's where the reporting skills come in. If it's a union shop, unions often have published wage grids You can go to the union steward for that shop and ask for the wage grids. Often it's minimums. It's not going to be the final salary that you can negotiate, but at least it gives you a framework that you can negotiate within. If it's not a unionized shop, that's more difficult. But again, doing those kinds of things like calling your colleagues in the field, asking, perhaps you knew someone who worked there, asking them what they were paid, what if they knew what other people were paid, digging around Glassdoor, like sometimes that kind of stuff can be really helpful, because I think it is so critical to be armed with as much information before you step into that office to negotiate. Because so often I feel in the media business, the media business is really hard. It's really hard to get jobs. And often there's this attitude of like, oh, we should be grateful for having a job. And then if you're a person of color or a woman, you should be triply and doubly and quadruply grateful for having a job. And we aren't thinking about that $20,000 that Tre'vell mentioned. So I think it's having that. And I think, to answer the second part of your question, I didn't bargain alone. I don't want to make it sound like it was just me in a room full of bosses. There was a bargaining committee of 7 people. Anthony Pesci was my co-chair. He was actually the ball buster at the bargaining table. You have not seen anyone kind of like go bananas at a bargaining table until you see Anthony Pesci go at the bosses. And it was really a team effort, because one of the things I've learned about bargaining is that you can go in and bargain for anything you want, but if you don't have the unit behind you, the bosses aren't going to care. Like, you have to have people coming into that room. You have to have people pressuring management, that kind of negotiation. It truly is a collective enterprise. And it was I had as much of a role in it in that room as anybody outside the room who helped stage actions and stand in front of the boss's offices with signs and wearing their t-shirts. All of that was as critical to getting that stuff done. Does it make the bosses look at me a little differently? I'm sure there's things they don't say in my presence. Let me put it that way.
I think you bring up an interesting point that I want to talk about too, which is like, we all know money, like money. So like, I want more money. More money equals, a better life condition sometimes, right? Like a better standard of living, at least. But one of the other things, and I thought that was great about the LA Times union there was a battle over IP. And sometimes we don't think about all the other things that come with negotiating for more money. You don't think about benefits. You don't think about retirement. You're not thinking about the long game. And so I want to open this up to everybody. Like, how do you think about, how do you advocate for those kinds of things? I know the IP battle was a hard one at the LA Times, for example,
Yeah, I think, I always start with the money, and you get as much money as you can out of them before you move on to the other things. But I think you are so right. The benefits and other things that you negotiate for are just as important. So if you've reached a ceiling on what a company is willing to pay, that's when you start turning to things like vacation. Can I get extra paid vacation? Can I get extra family leave? Can you guarantee me a certain amount of travel budget every year? Can you it's when they hand you that contract, like I always see that contract as a draft, and you have to think, what are some of the things that you want financially, professionally, in terms of benefits that you could be asking for? Because sometimes those things are actually much easier for a company to give you than more money, especially if a company has a very strict wage scale, or if it's you're working in the nonprofit sector and the pay isn't very good, they can give you other things. And so, yes, you need to know what you want in that area.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of piggyback off of that too, think about work is actually just one part of your life. So really think about what are the other things in your life that are important. And so for me, whenever I start a new job, I'm always negotiating for more salary, because my family doesn't live here. And so 2 weeks vacation ain't gonna cut it because I have to fly a really long way to go and visit anyone. Also think about professional development. Does your place of employ have an education fund. If you're thinking about doing something, you're like, you know what, this is going to be a bit expensive for me to pay for, but is there something that the company might be able to kind of chip in on? So yeah, I agree with Carolina 100%. Like, get as far as you can with what you get in your pocket, but then really sit down and look at what is important in your life and really kind of negotiate based on the things that you need outside of work.
Yeah, I'll just add that, like, I have, on the professional development tip, I have negotiated companies to cover my registration for SBJ or NABJ every single year and my expenses. I've had that written into a contract. I have gotten more vacation days, like Carolina has said. I have a friend, Michael Street. He works at, we worked at Out Magazine together, and he's now at Pride Media, which is the parent company of all those queer publications. But he always says that, like, if you don't negotiate, you have lost the negotiation, right? And I don't know about y'all, but I like to win, okay? Come on. And so there's always something else that you can be figuring out. Even if you do get to the money cap, like they're saying, there's always something else that you can figure out to kind of get the type of support, the type of comfort necessary, right, to do the work that you need to be able to do. So yes, always negotiate, y'all.
I think, if I could just add something to that quickly, I think, yes, I think, first of all, bosses expect, when they're hiring you, they expect to negotiate. So if you're not negotiating, yes, you are definitely losing. On the freelance side, I was a freelancer for 8 years, and I would just like to add that, again, on freelance contracts, everything is negotiable. And if you have capped out the rate, there are always other things that you can negotiate as part of a package. Maybe it's having that company pay your registration fee. Maybe it's for an event. Maybe it's having them write, sometimes you need a letter from an editor saying you're covering an event so that you can get in for free. Maybe you need to order some books. Like, there are so many other things that you can be asking for other than money. And you can do that. You are empowered as a freelancer to do that as well. And when I was a freelancer, I would frequently ask organizations like, okay, you can't pay me that much money, then pay my registration into, this conference.
One other thing actually that I just thought of too, the negotiation doesn't end when you get the job. So if you're kind of like, on balance, okay, I'm actually okay with this money. All right, I'm kind of okay with this vacay. This is actually an opportunity that's really going to help me in my career in other ways. Also, feel free to kind of say, okay, you can't reach what I'm really looking for in salary today. Let's review in 3 months. Let's review in 6 months. So it actually becomes an ongoing conversation, which is also good for you because you then stay in the habit of being able to negotiate as opposed to only doing it whenever you're changing jobs. So that's something to kind of keep in mind.
That's a good transition, because one of the other questions I wanted to ask you is well, how do you prepare to ask for a raise? I don't think I've ever asked for a raise. Like, now that I'm thinking about it, like, I asked for money at the top, but I can't remember the last time I went like, hey, what's up with the money again?
This is like literally one of my favorite things. So I will like jump in here. So there's a few things. So, we were talking about what are the things that are important to you in life, right? Again, that doesn't stop when you get the job. There are things that will continue to be important to you. Never lose sight of those things. The other thing too is also kind of, if folks are not keeping a record, like I kind of call it my praise box, but like when you are getting an email from a colleague like, oh my gosh, that story was dope, or thank yous, praise for your work, stuff from kind of audience members, anything that really kind of adds a case to like, look at me and my value to this company, keep hold of that. When you have a pretty decent number in that box, kind of be like, hey, you know what? Here are some things that I've been thinking about. Are there other opportunities? Can we look at my salary again? Because here is what, and especially for women, for reporters, like everyone wants to hire us right now, which is great. Like this is a really good time for us right now. And so really always be thinking about, what is the value that I am bringing to the company? What is the money that the company is making out of me? Whether it is just in terms of profile, because they are able to say, well, hey, I have a Black CCO or kind of whatever. So kind of really look at your value and really on a regular basis, go into that box and kind of say, here are the very tangible ways that I have brought value to this company. If you're someone, so say, Eric, you're doing these kind of events, or you're doing like membership drives, like really try to put some data on what you're doing. So if you're going out and doing events, hey, here's how many people learned about where I work and what we do because I was out in the world doing this additional work. So kind of over time, you're, again, like to kind of echo Carolina, we're really good at telling stories about our subjects and other people, but we also have to tell a story and build a narrative around ourselves and our contribution and what we're bringing to the workplace. So negotiate regular and often. And it's like anything, the more you do it, it won't feel scary, because it's not scary once you're in the habit of doing it, but you just have to be in the habit of doing it. So that's one of the things for folks that I mentor. I always suggest that, and also bluntly, it's a really good ego boost when you're having a bad day, that you can kind of go in this little box and be like, oh yeah, pop your own collar a little bit. Yeah, I did that. I did that. So that, I'm sure Tre'vell and Carolina have other thoughts too, but that's where I start with all that.
I was so inspiring. I just say I'm inspired.
And I'm sorry to all the other bosses who tomorrow are going to have people on their door like, yo, what's up with that pay rise though? What's up with that vacancy though?
I got sorry. Sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry.
Tre'vell, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was going to add that, also, I find negotiating very, very anxiety inducing. Even though I do it I am a freelancer, I'm always negotiating, right? With my freelancers that I commission, I'm editor at large at Xtra magazine, which is an LGBTQ outlet based in Toronto. But for the freelancers I work there, one of the things that I started doing, instead of just, as editors typically do, say, oh, this piece will be $300, I start asking them, what is your rate for this pitch that you have sent me? And you'll be surprised how many of them respond and say, I've never been asked that question. And then they give me a number, and it's a number significantly below what I would have paid them, right? And I paid them what I would have paid them anyway, because I'm like, okay, one, you need to know what you should be getting paid, even though at my little queer publication, I can't really pay you what you really, really should be getting paid, but I can pay you better than all these other people out here, which is weird because we're a smaller outfit. Anyway, I say that to say that I am always nervous when I'm negotiating a new contract, when I am in an interview process asking about money. And guess what? I do it anyway. I feel like you have to sometimes push through the discomfort. And maybe it does get easier, I'm sure it does. It has yet to get easier for me. But what I do have now is I have, a set of examples of language that I have crafted over the last few years that I don't even have to think about. I can go to a previous email and say, how did I ask for that thing there? And just copy and paste it and do it here. So there are benefits regardless whether you get past the anxiety or not. And I think that can be also very useful just in terms of building an arsenal for yourself that helps you articulate, right, how to add, the actual words to use to advocate for yourself. Because I think you're right, Eric. A lot of people feel like they just don't know how. As Brittany said in her introduction, they don't teach you none of this in grad school or undergrad for that matter, right? They just tell you to get your ass out there and figure it out. And so we're all learning. And that's why I think having more conversations, like this in public are important, but also something that I encourage people to do, particularly younger people, is to ask people what they make. Especially the people who are on these panels who are we waving the flag. When you make a connection with somebody, hey, I would love to know a range of what you make doing what you do, right? So that I can equip myself, when I get to that point, right? To know what I should be considering, because I know for me, I was told I had to make a vow of poverty to be a journalist. I was told I wasn't gonna make no money, honey. Okay. And so when I accepted that wonderful fellowship job, I was like, okay, this is cute. This is more than I thought I would ever be able to make as a journalist. And so we're not going to talk about negotiating. We're not going to talk about any of that, right? And then we all get set up, right? And so I forgot what I was saying, but the point is, you know, ask people what they make too, so that you can equip yourself when you go into these spaces. And if they don't want to tell you, they won't tell you, and that's fine. But you're a journalist. You should be used to getting no's and whatnot.
I think
Thank you, Tre'vell.
the anxiety that you mentioned is so real. It is hard to ask for stuff for ourselves. And part of it is, we are writers and we have fragile egos and we don't want anyone to tell us, no, you're not worth that. There is that part that goes into it. But, no boss is ever going to be offended by a writer negotiating with them. Like, they're just not. So if you think that, oh, this is going to piss my boss off, or this is going to offend them, or they've actually taken good care of me and I don't want to put them in this position. No, it's like they do this all the time. They are the big kids. They get paid the editor salaries. They're used to it. I did want to add that there is a helpful thing to ask for when you're negotiating a salary and or a raise. You can ask a company that you are going to work for if they have a range, an established range. If they don't have an established range, and they may not answer this, you can ask, what is the average that people in this position are making? Give me an average. That way I can, some companies will not do that. They want you to name a number, but you can always, like Tre'vell said, you can ask the question and they can say no, but that is a very good question to ask because it's not the minimum, it's what people are actually getting paid. And if you can't, and if it is a union shop, again, this is, if it is a union contract with a wage grid, all contracts are different. So I don't want to speak generically here, but many can, if you give them enough time, unions are volunteers, so please be patient, can give you that average. So I'm applying for a reporter 2 position. Can you tell me what the minimum for that position is? And can you tell me what the average is? And they may or may not be able to tell you, but knowing those numbers when you walk in is really helpful. And in union shops, if you're angling for a raise, knowing that kind of information and being like, oh, I'm a reporter too, I've been at this for 20 plus years and here's what I make and here's the average, I think it's time to give me a raise. Like, you are coming in with some real information in addition to like some of the achievements you might be able to list.
Beautiful, beautiful. We actually have a couple questions from the audience, and one of them pertains to unions. Christian wants to know, where would you recommend for someone that works in TV news to start unionizing? And also they want to know if it's possible in TV news.
There are TV unions. That is a good question. The TV unions are separate from the newspaper unions. I know that there are like crew unions and entertainment unions. I will, I can ask Christian if you want to get in touch with me off channel. I'm at carolina.miranda@latimes.com and send me an email and I'll try to find out from our union folks who the big TV unions are, but I apologize, I just don't know off the top of my head. And is this, I take it this is for TV news, this is not for feature production? Yeah, correct?
TV news, correct, yeah.
Okay, got it.
Great. And Blanca says, hi, I work under a union contract, and one thing managers will say, quote, we have to keep compensation fair among your team or level. Any advice on how to respond to that kind of argument?
That is a tough one. And that is something that management frequently uses because they're like, okay, we have this grid. The reporter 1 position pays between 60,000 and 75,000. So we don't want to be kicking people too high above that because you start creating inequities. Oftentimes they will just use it as an excuse not to pay more. I think one is asking for that average. They're telling you that there's no room for growth. But do you know that for certain? Because if you have an average for what people in your position are paid, you'll know what your salary is in relation to that. The other thing is that if the contract has already been negotiated and these wages are in stone, that's where maybe getting various people in that section who are in that category together to go petition management as a group, which always tends to be more effective. A group of people going to management is always going to be more effective than a single person. You know, management doesn't want to deal with labor unrest. So the minute there's a bunch of you in somebody's office saying, hey, you know, these wages are deflated, they're a problem, they have to begin to listen. But those would be the first couple of steps. That one is a tough one because companies do use it a lot as an excuse.
Well, I'm putting that question to you, Joanne. You're in a position where you get asked, people will, I assume, ask for raises. Like, what would you recommend for somebody asking for a raise in a situation like that?
Yeah, it's a tough one. And, you know, and I would say the pay equity issue is real, you know, especially when you're looking at it through the lens of women and people of color. Like, you really want to make sure that you're not skewing kind of one way or another. So, you know, I know for us, like our HR department, like takes it very seriously. And so we have a lot of conversations with them on the front end of, okay, if we're looking, say, like a group of people who are producers, let's just use that as an example. You know, if we're looking at promoting one person, we actually use it as an opportunity to look at everyone and be like, oh, okay, like, actually, is everyone actually due a pay rise right now, or is there something else that we can do within that? But you know, but there are some places that aren't as honest, I would say, and where they will just use the kind of like, well, but it's pay equity type of thing. But I agree. I think when you start looking at it en masse and just being like, okay, if there's a group of you, like, have conversations about what you earn. Like, that is the quickest way to establish whether there truly is pay equity or inequity in a newsroom or in a production house or what have you. Everyone isn't comfortable doing that. But I was actually just looking for it, I can't find it, but there is actually a resource where journalists and people who work in media have been like putting in what they earn anonymously. And they'll put in information which is kind of their job title, where in the country they're based, and then what they're earning. I'll see if I can find it and put it in the chat before we leave. But I think having hard, solid data that says, you know, someone either in this building or in a similar job, in a similar market earns X is like, go with the evidence. And also keep in mind that you're probably not just doing it for you, you're doing it for other people as well. So it's not easy from either end.
But I just want to add one thing to that, which is if you have truly maxed out on the salary cap for a particular position, there's always bonuses. And so
Yes.
If you have some particular achievements that you had recently, some big awards, some big hits, you can, you can't give me a raise, how about a bonus? And then you can also turn to benefits.
And actually, and I'm glad you said that, Caroline, and to kind of scroll back to the beginning with when you're negotiating, same thing. If you don't get to a salary point that you are satisfied with, kind of like a one-off signing bonus, actually a lot of places will do that because it's a one-off payment. It's not an ongoing salary thing. It's not something that's attached to your benefits and all the rest of it. So yeah, the bonus can be a way to go as well.
You know, it's an interesting thing. I wonder, you know, I've had to staff teams for audio most recently, and I like to bring in people that didn't go to grad school, that didn't go to like get their master's or whatever, and because they've never been given the shot to begin with, they don't qualify for these like tiers, you know, when they're like, because I'm SAG-AFTRA, and sometimes the tiers, like, you know, companies can use the tiers often to be like, well, this person doesn't have enough experience to qualify to be a producer one or whatever. And I just wonder, like, if there's any advice there, because for me, it's like, I didn't go to college. Like, I was community college, you know, I'm like, and had I not like created my own thing, I wouldn't have been able to work anywhere, right? So like I wonder how we fix a system that protects people who do have that, but can also be open for people who don't come from the traditional, paths that have been established by the status quo.
I think it's so important for people to make their own stuff. Like, we don't always want to spend our own money, but sometimes just like building your own experience, building your own resume can be the thing that will help you, especially if you're coming from, like, as people say, non-traditional. I don't even know what that means. It just means that you didn't go to school. It's like that doesn't even matter. It's like, can you tell a story? Yes, you can. Off you go. I think too, though, there's a lot of work to be done at the industry level, because like this is folded in with human resources, right? And human resources, because they're trying to make sure that they're doing things fairly, that there is pay equity, they're trying to judge everyone by the same standards. So I know at studios, we really look at when we're doing job descriptions, like, why are we putting in there that someone needs to have a bachelor degree? It doesn't matter. That's not actually relevant. So even at the front end, taking out things that would actually disqualify someone who actually may be perfectly qualified, but they just didn't go through this, high school, college, master's type route. Doing all those things doesn't actually make you a good journalist or program maker. It just means that you know how to go to school. No, that's a very different kind of thing. But if you are stuck in that situation where, even for people who may have kind of transitioned from other industries later in life and kind of said, hey, you know what, I want to get into program making, I want to get into journalism, one of the best ways is really to build your own resume. Like, don't wait on others to give you an opportunity, because all of that actually does count. Doing the work and having stuff that you can show is what will count. It doesn't necessarily that you have to work for a local NPR station or worked at your local metro paper or anything like that. It's the experience, however that experience comes in. Like, even if you're coming from if you've done internships, or you worked at your college paper or volunteered, like, all of that counts. So the more of that experience that you can get, it becomes, I literally just went through this like a few months ago, it becomes harder to say to someone, oh, well, you don't qualify for that higher level kind of producer role because you don't have the experience. And it's like, well, actually, I have experience going back to X year. It just may look a little different. So it's doing that work yourself on the front end, but I think also on the back end for us, for companies and HR departments, is just really starting to kind of twist that lens on what experience actually means.
Excellent. We have a question from Katie, or Caddy. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Mexican names are hard. Hello from Boston. How long of a time frame do you wait to follow up after putting forth a counteroffer? What's the best course of action to take? Good question.
I think it probably depends on the organization you're interviewing with and maybe the degree of comfort of the person you're interviewing with. I mean, I know that the LA Times being a news organization, things can get pretty scattered and news breaks, and all of a sudden your hire is just not the priority of the day. And so, I don't think there's any official answer to that. I don't know, Joanne, if as a manager, or Tre'vell as somebody who edits other writers, you have a sense of what's appropriate. I mean, I would usually, when I was in my salary negotiations with the LA Times, we probably spent about a week on it, with everybody taking like a couple days to get back to each other, because you make an offer, that person has to then take it to their boss, who takes it to their boss, who takes it to HR, who takes it to accounting. So it's got to go through a chain of command. So I'd say 2 or 3 days, and you do the check-in. And then if you haven't heard in a week, that's when you have to be like, what is happening?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. A couple of days, 3 days, because if you've got to the point of, you've been made an offer, then, that hiring manager already knows like what's in their budget, how, kind of where the wriggle room is, kind of what things they may be able to kind of put on the table, all of that. So it probably shouldn't take as long as a week, but, news happens, life happens. But I'd say if you haven't heard by the end of the week, then I'd follow up.
Excellent. I have, one of the things, one of the questions we have is like, how do you get the green light to work on a big project if you've never had a big project before? It's the chicken and the egg scenario, right? Like, I feel like everybody here had to have that first big project in order to be where you are now. So I'm wondering how you built that.
I'll say for me, when I was at the Times, I recognized that in order to do some of the things that I needed to do, I needed to find like allies and accomplices in the newsroom, right? And so a few of my bigger projects that I kind of spearheaded at the Times was ultimately because I went directly to the programmer people and I was like, hey, I have this idea. Can you make it happen? Because that was always the thing at the Times. Was like, girl, I don't know if we can, take that thing that's in your head and put it up on the internet. It was just like a lot of, we haven't done that before, or we don't typically do it this way. And it's like, girl, let me go to the people who would actually have to make it. Can we do it? And once I got the support, Sean Green is his name. He did all my stuff. Once I got Sean Green to be like, yeah, we can do that. And it's actually very easy. I just need a week for it. I was like, cool. Then I circled back to my editors and was like, I have this idea. And I already know who can do it and that he has the availability to do it. Now I just need you to say yes. And some of that partnering was with other, the more established folks on my team, right? It's not just the project that Tre'vell's doing. It's also a project that Tre'vell and Rebecca Keegan, our prize star, is also doing, right? And so like, you gotta play the game sometimes. And then after that first one, and they see, that you can actually take something from idea to product, then I think it opens up the types of opportunities in terms of storytelling that you can ultimately do. So partnering with folks who you feel like have the ear or respect of an editor or someone in charge, I think could be a useful approach for some folks.
When I worked at Time Magazine, I did the exact same thing. When I would get a no from an editor on an idea, I'd go to a colleague and be like, do you want to work on this idea together? And I also think it's partly, again, it's that kind of, they see a group wanting to do something or a pair of people wanting to do something. And it all of a sudden, it's not just your thing. It's like, oh, this is something that extends beyond one person. And building those horizontal allies. I always say those horizontal allies are going to be your bosses of tomorrow. So it's critical to build those kinds of relationships when you are in a newsroom.
And this part, I think people don't like to hear quite as much, so it's not quite so fun, but really kind of become acquainted with what your company's kind of strategic goals are. And when you're coming up with ideas, really try and think about them through the lens of your company's strategic goals. So if the strategic goal is, my light just went out, oh well. If the strategic goal is to, increase the number of women of color who, engage with a product, like how does your idea actually kind of align with that? Also kind of dig a little deeper too, like, all right, what are the resources that are going to be needed for this, both in terms of time or what actual money might be involved in this, and what is the return on investment for the organization? Often places aren't really thinking that way, but if you, as the person going in with the idea, can really kind of go in essentially with the business case for why doing this story or doing this project or doing this podcast or whatever is a good idea, it becomes, from the business end, it becomes a little bit harder to say no. But if they do say no, they're looking at you in a different light, because then you're not just a content creator, you're a business person and you're thinking about the business and the bottom line. And there isn't a manager alive who doesn't love that.
Great. We have one more question. I think time for one more question. This is from Tori Edgar. At my company, we have annual reviews. Sorry, my dog wants to chat. At my company, we have annual reviews and potential raises. Is there an industry standard of how much percentage-wise your salary should raise each year?
Unfortunately, that's usually zero in the media industry, just to be real. Yeah, there is not a standard rate. Usually, you know, when we talked about rates on behalf of the guild, we were looking at cost of living, adjustment for cost of living, and then plus. So we wanted people throughout the term of the contract to get, I mean, I think at the time we negotiated the contract, cost of living was rising at 1.8% a year, 1.9% a year. It's probably much higher now with inflation. And then add a little bit onto that, so that way your raise isn't immediately eaten by increased price of toilet paper and gasoline. And so that's the way we looked at it. So if you are at a company where these rates are not set automatically, looking at cost of living, annual cost of living increases rates online can be helpful in terms of knowing what you might want your minimum increase to be.
Beautiful. I want to thank our panelists. I'm gonna bring Nathan back in here. Great host, Nathan. Thank you so much for having us all.
Thank you, Eric. This was an amazing panel, by the way. I really enjoyed. I hope everyone got as much out of it as I did. I feel like it's one of these empowering conversations that we don't have enough of in this industry, or we're all too polite and shy to ask someone sitting next to us, how much are you making? So I'm going to take some of Tre'vell's advice and ask people that. I'm just going to ask everyone I meet. So all that being said, thank you for joining SPJ Los Angeles tonight. We are going to be hosting an actual in-person event in August, and that's going to be our regional conference. I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to keep an eye out for our socials. It's going to be at Loyola Marymount University. And we also are going to be opening up our scholarship. Well, we already have opened up our applications for scholarships for budding journalists in universities or high school. So head on over to SPJ LA's website for more information about all of that. And yeah, thank you again, everyone, for your time. It was really a pleasure.
Shout out to Brittany, who just got nominated for a Livingston Award. Can't be here because she's working. But thanks, everyone.
All right. Good night.